Good morning everyone, it's Rob Jones from Jones Maintenance Services, getting back onto part 3 of the BMC 1.5 strip down and rebuild. 18th of May, hopefully everyone in the UK is getting back to some sort of normality now. I think the government has sort of stipulated that we've all got to drink 126 pints to get the industry back on the road, so just remember that's not in one session, drink in moderation. So what we're going to move on to today is the block has now been cleaned and repainted. We're going to go over briefly how I did that, and then we're going to go over some of the internal components and start getting this engine back together because it's actually going to be going out to a customer. So any questions, please leave them in the comments below and I'll try and answer them to the best of my ability. But we'll be referring to the technical documents and we'll go over all the settings and specifications as we go along. Hope you enjoy the video. So then the block itself. So what I've done is I've taken a electric drill with a wire rotary brush on there, and I've gone over the whole block, removed all the old remaining paint and most of the oil and grease, and then given it a complete degrease. Now you see where the fuel pump's going to mount, where the oil filter housing is going to mount. Over the space of 24 hours, just because I've been working outside, that some surface rust has appeared. So when we come to fitting these items, what we'll do is we'll get some fine grit sandpaper, we'll clean off these surfaces, just make sure they're completely free from any sort of grime or debris just before we mount those. But all I've done is painted the whole block in my signature Mohawk green paint, okay, high temperature paint. There are some spots that need cleaning up, but it'll have another coat of paint when it's finally assembled before it goes out to the customer. So drawing your attention then to the internals, which is the main focus of this video. Okay, there is still a little bit of sort of grime around, okay, which will be cleaned up. But what I really want to focus on is how the BMC 1.5 differs from the 1.8. Now, if you've taken your block apart using this sort of video as a tutorial, okay, remember the order that components came out. If you try getting the components back in the wrong order, they're not going to go. So it's quite key that you sort of get that photographic memory kicked into action and just remember the order of things that came out. Now at the moment I've got the camshaft back in, okay, camshaft's still in spec, okay, needs a final clean up, but it's going to get removed and cleaned up in a moment. But the free bearings for the camshaft, okay, still in spec and still nice and clean. Now they very rarely fail, but if you do have a lower end failure and the camshaft bearings are affected, then they need to be taken out and then new ones pressed in, and the workshop manual refers on how to do that. But luckily still in spec, still ready to go. So camshaft's in at the moment. Now all these other components, for example the one that runs your fuel injection pump, okay, obviously on that drive there, it can only go in after you've put the camshaft in. So everything is kind of a big jigsaw puzzle, okay, and everything needs to go in an order, okay, to allow it to click in place. If you try doing it in any sort of other order, okay, these components aren't going to go. So as we go over the construction, okay, piece by piece, I'll show you the order that they get returned in, how the camshafts then retain with the camshaft retainer, and how all the other components click in. So the camshaft's had another clean up, okay, it's now set on its bearings, okay, and lined up where it's going to sit once the camshaft retainer, which goes on the end, is back in place. However, that's now sitting in there, and you can line it up, okay, and then getting your drive that goes across, okay, for your fuel injection pump, make sure it's orientated in the right direction, and then that just simply slides down, okay, and fits in that sort of recess there. Now excuse the bouncy camera, my actual camera's in for repair at the moment, but it just takes a little bit of wiggle around and then everything will drop in place, okay. Now I'm still working on this engine outside and off the stand at the moment because my stand's being used for something else. So it's easier that I work on it at the moment. It's going to take a bit of wiggling around. Okay, as you can see, it's jumped out of place. If it does that, just rotate the camshaft again, okay, and then take the sort of pinion gear, whatever you want to call it, out, okay, and then wiggle it till it sits back in place. Once that's dropped in place, then just by rotating the camshaft with your hand, you'll be able to see your fuel injection pump gear moving around now. And then obviously when you put your oil pump back in, that runs off the back of that drive, or runs off the cam or gear, okay, and that'll run your oil pump. But what we do now is get this lined up on the front, just down here, get the camshaft retainer in to stop the camshaft bouncing around any further. Okay, so what I've done then is I've got the new bearing set, and I've taken the bearing halves and fitted them 1, 2, 3 into there. Make sure it's clean behind, no lubrication required behind, but on the fronts I've just lubricated it with the engine oil that we're going to use for this motor, okay, so that we're not doing metal on metal straight away, and just making sure that it's free from any sort of debris, because otherwise we'll end up with dramas straight away when we run the engine, but lightly lubricated. I've also got the frost washer halves, okay, still standard spec for the tops, okay, and they're just sitting in there. Now if you're working on this engine completely upside down, they'll retain themselves. They don't tend to move out of the way. Because I'm working on this engine on its side, they may slip out. But what I'm now going to do is I'm going to get the crankshaft, which has come back from being inspected. It didn't need grinding, it just needed polishing. Lightly lubricate that, and then jiggle it into place and get it sat there in place. After that then, what we're going to do is we're going to put the other bearing halves on top, the other frost washer halves, and then we'll go along and get the matching blocks, okay, retainers, and get those bolted in place so that the crankshaft's retained. Okay, so we've got our corresponding bearing halves placed into the carriers 1, 2 and 3, noting that the centre one is labelled front, pointing towards the front of the engine. Okay, and the other two pretty much self-explanatory where they go. Lightly lubricated again, place in this case bolts, so the bolts are placed in, okay, no washers, and they're torqued up to 75 pound-foot or 101 newton meters, so 2, 4 and 6. Okay, there is a specialist tool to align them, however you can do it without it. Okay, just making sure that they're even and that you're not putting any sort of arduous stress trying to place these in. If you are putting any sort of adverse arduous stress placing them in, take it out, stop, have a look. Okay, sometimes the bearing halves do pop out, okay, and you end up crushing them trying to wiggle it in, but they're in place now. So what we can move on to do now then is place the engine so that the sump is on its base, or where the sump fits onto is on its base. I've removed the threads off the oil pump at the moment, okay, and I'm going to sit it on there, and then we can start to put the pistons in. Now I am waiting for a replacement standard piston and rings from Charnley's, so we can get 3 of them done, but we'll have to await the other one. I'll try and capture it at the end of this video before I publish it, but if not, next time on episode 4 you will see the 4th cylinder in there before we progress any further. So what we've done then is using a piston ring compressing tool. Okay, we've gapped the piston rings, and that can be found in the technical docs on the BMC Boat Engines group and online. And all I've simply done is put the other half of the bearing halves inside, gently lowered the piston out so that it sits with one bearing half onto the crankshaft itself, rotated the crankshaft, placed the other con rod half on with the bearing, and then nipped the bolt up to 47 newton meters or 75 pound-foot, and then using the securing tabs just bent them over to stop them from shaking loose. But what we've got then is a free rotating crankshaft now. Everything still looks good, and like I said before, we are waiting on one replacement piston, so by the time we do part 4, piston number 4 will be in there before we crack on. But so far so good. Like I said before, any questions, please get in touch. Jones Maintenance Services on Facebook, or drop a comment below. Thanks for watching.